And we'll now take questions from the press. And the first question goes to Finnish Broadcasting Company, Roni Kuronen.
So, hello, I'm Roni Kuronen. I'm with the Finnish broadcaster Yle. My question goes mainly to President Ruto, but maybe Mr. Stubb can also elaborate. Our president has often emphasized the growing influence and importance of countries belonging to the so-called global south. So how do you, as a president of an African nation, which is included in this global south, see the position of the global south in world politics right now?
Okay. Do we take all the questions or I answer that one first?
That one first.
That one first. Okay. Thank you very much. It's long since I was in a classroom, so I'm not used to answering questions, but I will. First, the Global South is an integral part of what is the world we live in today. And therefore, the participation, the contribution, the ideas, the suggestions coming from the Global South are as important and as are relevant as suggestions coming from elsewhere. If I speak the perspective of the Global South biased to the African continent, I will tell you three things. Number one, we believe that we need a paradigm shift in the way Africa is being viewed. For a very long time, it was about colonialism, it was about aid, it was about assistance. It is our very considered view, and this is the position we took at the Africa Forward Summit last month in Nairobi, that going forward, we need a much more forward-looking relationship with our friends and with partners. A forward-looking relationship that takes into account what Africa has to offer. We believe that it is no longer fair to view Africa using the lenses of the challenges that face our region. It's not just about war, it's not just about disease, it's not about poverty. That is a different view. There is a different view to Africa, a view that brings the assets of Africa into the equation. Africa has some of the largest natural resources that can benefit Africa and the world. Africa, number two, has a vast richness in renewable energy resources. Hydro, wind, geothermal. That's why Kenya's grid, for example, is 90% green. Africa also has the world's, 2/3, in fact, of the world's remaining arable land that can feed the world. That is why today, 40% of flowers in Europe come from Kenya. And that can expand to many other things. And number three, Africa has a young, now educated population that presents a good opportunity as a workforce, but also a market. In 20 years, by 2050, Africa will have a quarter of the world's population and will contribute 40% of the world's workforce. It is our considered view that there is need for a paradigm shift in the way Africa is viewed, so that Africa is viewed with the lenses of the opportunities and assets that Africa has to contribute to not just African prosperity, but global prosperity. That's number one. Number two, we believe that we need to work together to resolve some of the hurdles that constrains Africa's growth. And there are three of them. Number one is access, limited access that today defines resources, concessional resources for Africa's development. And number two, to deal with the challenge of unfair financial architecture that, limits access to development capital in the capital markets, where Africa pays a disproportionately high interest rates compared to others. The current financial architecture actually penalizes African countries unfairly. And number three, we need to deal with the credit rating agencies that were designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore. So, and we have ideas on how this can be dealt with. We believe, and we are reorganizing ourselves as a continent. Number one, realizing that the development of our continent is first and foremost our responsibility as African leaders. We do not want to anymore, assign blame to others. We want to take responsibility ourselves for organizing our own economies. And all we are asking for partnership is so that we can mobilize resources from domestic resources from Africa. We have, for example, close to $4 trillion of savings in our pensions, in our insurance companies. These are resources that can be unlocked without asking for money from others. With just guarantees, we can be able to unlock a lot of resources for the development of our continent. And finally, we also believe that for Africa to be able to make useful contribution to global progress and global prosperity, we have to position ourselves appropriately, and that is why we are pushing for a fairer international financial architecture and a reformed international governance, where the UN recognizes 1.5 billion people in Africa, 54 countries that today have no say in the UN Security Council. They are not represented, and it completely undermines the credibility of the UN system. We believe in that reform, and I'm very happy that we share this position with Finland, that there is need for reform of the international financial architecture, there is need for reform of the international governance architecture, so that we bring the ideas, the contributions, the suggestions of every part of the globe. That is how we're going to move forward together. That is my take on the contribution of the Global South to global progress.
I can only second what President Ruto just said. I don't think there's only a paradigm shift in our thinking on Africa, but there needs to be a paradigm shift in our thinking on global institutions. And as two countries that support multilateral institutions, so rules and norms, I believe that we can work on this together. Now, our calculation is that right now there's a tension between two competing views on how the world should be run. One is what we call multipolarity. That for me is about deals, transactions, and quite often the rule of the big. They basically run the show, big power politics. Then on the other side, you have multilateralism, which for me is international institutions, rules and norms, and essentially cooperation. It is a system that has benefited a small country like Finland throughout our independence. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it has been a cornerstone of our success, together, of course, with democracy, freedom, rule of law, fundamental rights, human rights, the values that Kenya and Finland share. So then we have to ask ourselves the question, who are the ones who can work together with us? And the answer is the Global South, in a very broad view, because if I ask my friends in the global south and most of my friends in the global west as well and the global north, they support multilateral institutions. But how do we bring back the UN to become the key peace mediator in the world? Well, we do it by reforming the UN institutions, because the power structure of the UN was created in a post-World War II era as the image of the victors at the time. That's why we have now called for the doubling of the UN Security Council members, which means at least 1 for Latin America, 2 for Africa, and 2 for Asia. Because otherwise, if you don't feel that you have agency in that institution, you're not going to want to deal with it. And the same goes, I think, for the reform of the financial institutions, whether it's the WTO, whether it's the IMF, the World Bank. And one revelation that I had in our conversation today is also linked to the way in which we see the credit rating institutions. So I think we have a lot to work here together, and I believe that the global south is going to be the one that decides the next world order, and that's why I'm very happy to have William here as well to discuss the matter.
Anu Korhonen, MTV News.
Anu Korhonen from the MTV News. The first questions for President Stubb. In the interview with MTV, the chairman of the Ukrainian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, Mereshko, hoped that you, President Stubb, would be appointed as Europe's representative for the ceasefire negotiations. How do you comment on this? And the second question is for President Ruto. At the moment, there have been no confirmed cases of Ebola in Kenya. Do you understand the residents' concern? Thank you.
As far as European representation in peace mediation, I think my starting point is twofold. The first one is we need to coordinate, we need to have a common agenda, we need to have a common position. We are now in a situation whereby Ukraine is in a position of strength militarily, politically, and economically. That is why I believe that it would be high time for Europe to reach out and have diplomatic conversations with the leadership of Russia, more specifically President Putin. My second take is that I think the best grouping of countries to do this would be E3. In other words, the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So it's sort of more than the EU. If then a country like Finland or a country like Norway can work in the back office, facilitate and help these negotiations, by all means, but I don't personally see myself as a representative here. I think it's important that we have the big players up in the front, France, Germany and the UK.
Thank you very much. On the subject of pandemic in general, we have built a coalition of many countries, because when you talk about a pandemic, you're not talking about a situation that respects boundaries. The Ebola case in DRC is a source of concern for Kenya, as it is a source of concern for all people globally, in our region and globally. And as a responsible nation, we took the very early steps of making sure that we organize ourselves, we prepare ourselves to take head-on whatever situations that would come our way with respect to this pandemic. We have set up along our borders, especially borders that have people who cross from DRC. And just for context, we have thousands of Kenyans in Eastern DRC. We have soldiers in Eastern DRC, and it is natural that for us as a nation, we need to prepare ourselves. So we have set up 23 isolation units, places where we can deal with this challenge. We have tested close to 100,000 people who have come into Kenya, and by God's grace, none of those people have tested positive. In fact, the World Health Organization has reviewed the numbers that were initially put out from 1,000 cases. That has now been reviewed as late as yesterday to 500 cases. The number of deaths have also been reviewed downwards from about 250 in June, in early June, to now 100 cases. So much as the pandemic is not as serious as it was originally envisaged, it still remains a source of concern for us as a region and for Kenya in particular. And having a huge diplomatic footprint, with the UN office in Nairobi being the only UN office in the global south, and being a diplomatic hub and a regional hub, we have had to raise our standards higher to make sure that we protect all our citizens and also protect all the UN staff and all our friends. That is the requirement of the Constitution of Kenya, and we have taken steps to make sure that our citizens understand this. Our friends also understand this, and we have made it possible for friends to come in and support. We have support from different countries. We have support from the United States to manage this situation. They have also offered to set up, of the 23 isolation units, the United States have offered to set up one of them. And we are working together to make sure that we manage this situation. And as I said, for avoidance of doubt, there is no reported case of any Ebola in Kenya so far. As part of a regional approach, the Africa Union is convening a meeting, a virtual meeting, later next week, to be able to rally our support and coordinate response to the Ebola question.
Thank you all for your participation. Press conference has ended.
Thank you very much.